Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we'll be diving into one of the most complex and fast-evolving issues for sustainability professionals, how to navigate the uncertainty in a shifting regulatory landscape. Thanks for joining. So a quick introduction to those who haven't heard about us yet. Learning is an international management consultancy specialized in corporate sustainability and responsible business conduct, based in Berlin. We advise companies on all aspects and elements of human rights and environmental due diligence, including strategy alignment and preparation for the upcoming EU regulations. So my name is Naz Akyol Çağlar. I'm the head of marketing and communications here at Learning. I also work as a consultant for sustainability communications and capacity building projects to support clients' needs and organizational goals. And I'll be moderating today's session. And I'm here with two of my dear colleagues, Katarina Behrendt and Maxine Bischle, who are driving the legal and strategy alignment work streams at our company. So Katarina is a consultant and head of legal at Learning. With her background as a German lawyer, she helps clients from various sectors develop and implement human rights due diligence across their value chains. Her work focuses on keeping up with regulatory developments at both national and international level, and she also leads the legal team that provides legal briefings for both internal and external audiences. Maxine is also a consultant. She's a specialist in corporate sustainability reporting and double materiality assessments. She's an expert in designing solutions and strategies that align with the latest international frameworks and regulations to help advance sustainability agendas. With her master's degree in human rights, she also supports clients at Learning in developing and implementing human rights due diligence throughout their value chains. So before we start, let me remind us a few things. Our Insight Hub sessions are structured as 45-minute webinars featuring expert insights and interactive discussions with our audience. Towards the end of the session, we'll take 15 minutes to answer your questions. You can post your questions at any time in the Q&A function, and you can also upvote them, upvote existing questions to help us prioritize the questions which are most relevant to you. If we run out of time and any questions remain unanswered, we will follow up with answers after the session, and a recording of this webinar will be available for you to share with your colleagues afterwards. A quick disclaimer, this is not a legal advice. We are sharing our interpretation of the law based on our consulting expertise and experience, but it should not be considered as a legal counsel. Yeah, so let's get started. So why we're here, we are in a moment of transformation in the field of corporate sustainability. I guess the momentum that we have seen until now was undeniable. Global investors have long embedded sustainability into decision-making. Supply chain expectations were very much on the rise. Stakeholders, including from regulators to communities, they have demanded greater transparency and accountability. However, we are now seeing a backlash, a political pushback, growing legal uncertainty, and internal fatigue within companies, which are already grappling with inflation, geopolitical instability, and supply chain disruptions. So the sustainability field is under a very big pressure from both external and internal challenges. And in this environment, it is very easy to fall into the compliance mindset. But let's be clear, compliance alone isn't a strategy. And what we see and what we believe is that businesses need now is a way to cut through this noise and focus on what really matters to them, to their value chains, and develop strategies that are adaptive, human-centered, and aligned across their teams and functions. So that's what we are here to explore in the session, how to turn this legal uncertainty into strategic foresight, how to reframe sustainability as a driver for resilience, not just as a compliance burden, not just as a risk management tool, how to navigate current uncertainties without losing our direction. And we are often asked in our client conversations, should we wait for regulatory clarity before taking an action? And our answer is not if you want to stay ahead, because delaying action can increase long-term exposure, whether through legal liability, reputational damage, or the cost of reactive crisis response. So instead, this is the moment to build internal alignment, clarify roles and responsibilities within your organizations, and maybe embed flexibility into your sustainability and due diligence strategies. So with this current picture in place, I'd like to bring in Katarina to tell us what this means from a legal perspective. What are the key implications of the Omnibus proposal for how companies approach due diligence today?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nas. That's a great question to start with, and certainly a very timely one, since just yesterday the EU Commission published its 4th Omnibus package. And actually, even just this morning, the Commission has published a draft delegated act, which would limit the amount of Wave 1 companies that have to report certain data points under the CSRD. So yeah, I think Omnibus is certainly the word of the moment, and we definitely see a lot happening at the moment. But of course, it's also always important to emphasize that we are mainly looking at proposals at this point. But let's take a very quick step back first. As probably most of you remember, we were in a very similar situation almost exactly a year ago with the political back and forth around the original adoption of the CSRD. Back then, we thought we had found a compromise that would work for everyone, including for businesses and rights holders. And yet again, as you already mentioned, Nas, the political landscape has shifted quite significantly. And yeah, amidst this political whirlwind, we now find ourselves in a situation of legal uncertainty, which is, of course, especially difficult to navigate for companies. And as many of you are probably also aware, there has been a lot of movement in the human rights and environmental due diligence space since the Commission proposed its first Omnibus package 3 months ago at the end of February. Now, at the moment, we are actually looking at 4 different Omnibus packages, with more already in the works. I won't be going into detail of every Omnibus package, but would like to quickly touch on them. Omnibus packages 1 and 2, as I already mentioned, they were published at the end of February of this year, and they aim at streamlining sustainability rules, and they refer to the CSRD, the CSRD, the EU taxonomy, CBAM, and the rules of on EU investments. Omnibus Package 3 was published last week and focuses on the common agricultural policy. And finally, Omnibus 4 was published yesterday and introduces a new category of small mid-caps, and also, quite importantly, proposes to delay the implementation of the batteries due diligence obligations under the EU Battery Regulation for 2 years to August 2027, with due diligence guidelines to be published by the Commission by July 2026. Apparently, there's also a 5th Omnibus package focusing on the defense industry, and a 6th Omnibus package focusing on the chemical industry. These are currently under development, but of course, in this regard, nothing has officially been published yet. So yeah, as we can see, there have been a lot of developments in these past 3 months, and yeah, it has become quite tricky to actually keep up with it. I would like to now have a little bit of a deeper look into the developments of the CSDDD, since I think that's certainly very, very important for our listeners, and of course the Omnibus Package 1. The latest developments around the Omnibus proposal itself, with the specific focus on the CSDDD, are that the Commission has proposed quite significant amendments. Most notably, companies would be required to focus their due diligence mainly on their tier 1 suppliers. This would actually have a major impact on corporate strategies and management systems. I think that's something I would like to highlight. It would definitely undermine a proper risk-based approach, and could turn due diligence into a bureaucratic and quite inefficient exercise. Actually, something that we've already seen, at least in parts, with the German Supply Chain Act. And I think, that would actually be quite a good opportunity to learn from, and really focus on the risk-based approach. From the side of the European Parliament, the Econ Committee has published a draft that, for example, proposes aligning CSRD and CSDDD with a threshold of a net worldwide turnover of 450 million euros and 3,000 employees instead of the current 1,000 employees. However, and that's also very important to emphasize, is that the debate in the Parliament has only just started, and it's likely to continue into the second half of the year. So that's definitely also something that needs to be monitored very closely. The Council's position remains widely unclear at the moment. However, EU member states met just 3 days ago to discuss a compromise text prepared by the Council presidency. However, I think we've probably also all seen statements from different leaders of key member states. These statements definitely raise major concerns. For example, President Macron of France has reportedly called for the CSDDD to be taken off the table entirely, and Germany's Chancellor Merz has publicly stated his intention to cancel the entire CSDDD. At the same time, we have the German Vice Chancellor, Lars Klingbeil, which publicly pointed out that the German coalition agreement, which still commits Germany to supporting EU-level due diligence legislation. This is one of the examples, I think, where we see tension even within national governments, which also contributes to the overall unpredictability at the moment. And I think, this is also definitely where a lot of concern and even frustration is coming from, because officially the omnibus packages are being promoted under the umbrella of simplification. And I mean, if we are also looking at the work we're doing with clients, for example, simplification in itself is generally speaking welcomed. For example, when it comes to streamlining terminology across different pieces of legislation, that can certainly be a very good idea. But what we are currently seeing goes far beyond that, at least the trend, and even to the point of trying to dismantling, for example, the CSDDD. And I think we all agree that cannot be in the interest of any stakeholder, including companies that are genuinely committed to responsible business practices. And yes, I think that is also why it's really important that we've been seeing strong engagement from civil society, also from academia, and from industry. For example, a number of academics and large businesses are calling for a strong CSDDD. I think that definitely shows that the current direction is not universally welcomed by all stakeholders. And at this moment, where a lot is being negotiated and certainly a lot is at stake, it is also an opportunity. I feel like for different stakeholders, including businesses, to make their voices heard. There are various ways to do this: joining forces with your industry peers, engaging in consultations, or we've also actually seen in the last couple of days, for example, individual members of parliament who have published surveys to collect feedback. And yeah, this is on the EU level, very quickly touching upon the national level. Again, in Germany, where we do have the Supply Chain Act in place, we are also seeing conflicting political signals. While there are statements that the German Supply Chain Act should be entirely abolished, this would again contradict the coalition agreement, which calls for severe human rights violations to still be penalized under law. So yeah, this internal inconsistency only adds to the broader legal uncertainty. And yeah, I think we are all here to ask ourselves, where does that leave us? The short answer is, yeah, in a lot of legal unpredictability and uncertainty. But still, and I think this is always very important to emphasize, is that while it may feel like everything is shifting at once, I think it's always helpful to step back and see where we are in the larger process. If we're looking at the past 14 years since the adoption of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, we can see a trend, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. What we're experiencing now might just be that 1 step back. There are still many national and international laws currently in place or soon to be applied. The CSDDD is still likely to take effect, while Wave 1 companies are already reporting under the CSRD and the EU taxonomy. In addition, companies will need to prepare for and ensure compliance with the EU Forced Labor Regulation, very important. Then also the EU Battery Regulation that I mentioned earlier, and also the EU Deforestation Regulation, just to name a few. And so what our companies ought to do with the current unpredictability? As Nas already mentioned earlier, we definitely suggest to try to cut through the noise and really focus on action, at least as far as it's within our control. And yeah, I think this is exactly what we are also trying to get to in this webinar specifically.
Thanks so much for that overview of the legal and political landscape, Katarina, and also for reminding us of that progress often comes in cycles of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It was a very good reminder. Let's now shift to the strategic side of the conversation. While some may view sustainability purely through the lens of compliance, the real front runners, I guess, in this ecosystem do see it as a pillar for future readiness. And here I'd like to bring in Maxine. How can companies use sustainability as a driver for resilient value chains?
Yeah, thanks for this great question, Naz. We're definitely seeing that in this time of legal uncertainty, companies that treat sustainability as more than just compliance exercise are actually the ones that are best positioned to manage their risk, protect their reputation, and also build real and long-term resilience. Katarina will touch more upon the risk and reputation in just a moment, but I just want to focus on 2 points. And we're also seeing that sustainability isn't just defensive, but it's also a strategic driver of innovation, cost reduction, and also competitive advantage. So we're seeing that when companies embed sustainability into their value chains proactively, they actually also open opportunities to, for example, rethink materials, redesign processes, and develop smarter products, all of which also strengthens long-term competitiveness. But at the same time, there's also real potential to cut costs through energy efficiency, circular design, and more sustainable sourcing. What we've learned is that sustainability-led innovation builds more adaptable and future-ready business models. And companies that also move early aren't just keeping up, and they're often actually the ones shaping the market. So I just want to make this a bit more practical. And to do this, I want to look at 2 examples of companies that are using sustainability to their advantage. The first example I'd like to use is IKEA. And they've been placing a particular focus on circular design. So for example, they've been developing modular repairable furniture and using recyclable materials, which is not only helping them reduce environmental impact, but also actually lowering long-term production and disposal costs. They've also started offering take-back services that help them recover materials and also extend product life cycles, which is reducing the need for new inputs. Beyond this, IKEA has also shifted to using sustainable materials, and this is a trend we're seeing quite often. They've started using bamboo, recycled plastics, for example, and also the FSC certified wood. This is also helping them hedge against raw material price volatility and also supporting long-term supply chain security. So in this case for IKEA, sustainability isn't just value-based, it's a cost-efficient and future-ready business strategy. To use a second example, I want to look into Armed Angels. So they're a smaller purpose-led fashion brand from Germany that builds resilience through a deep integrated approach to sustainability and transparency. Armed Angels does a lot of work with their suppliers and quite closely actually to ensure fair working conditions and also responsible practices throughout the value chain. We see that this creates a lot of trust, especially on a foundational level, and leads to accountability. And actually also similar to IKEA, they've been investing in material innovation using organic and circular and low impact fabrics like recycled cotton. And this is really positioning themselves as a leader in the industry. For Armed Angels, we see that the commitment flows through their brand, and the transparent approach that they take really stands out and builds also a strong consumer loyalty. And this is important, especially as we're noticing that greenwashing is actually continuing to grow despite everything. Just as a disclaimer, I know that the companies I've been mentioning are front runners, so it's important for each company to consider this from their own perspective, what's important for their business model, and also what's important for their stakeholders. And before quickly passing it on to Katharina, I also just want to mention that a strong sustainability commitment doesn't just resonate with consumers, but also employees, as it helps build purpose, pride, and engagement internally, and also attracts and retain talent. And on this note, Katharina, could you just tell us a bit more about how you see sustainability influencing a company's broader reputation and its ability to manage risks?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for already touching upon the other aspects. And I think especially the 2 points you mentioned earlier, both the best practice examples from IKEA and Armed Angels, and also the role of employee satisfaction actually lead us directly to another key driver, which is a company's reputation. Regardless of whether a company is ever actually sued or sanctioned, making negative headlines always has an adverse effect on a company's reputation. And reputational risk is certainly something that companies can't afford to overlook. And I think, yeah, this aspect is also nothing new. Reputation has actually been a driving force behind the business and human rights agenda for decades now. For example, and some of you might also already know this example, if we're looking back at the 1990s, when Nike was in the spotlight for allegedly profiting from sweatshop conditions and also child labor in Vietnam, that case really pushed the issue of human rights and global supply chains into the spotlight. And that was not just back in the 1990s, it's something that we've seen ever since. Similar cases are continuously happening and being spotlighted in the media. Another example is how Starbucks, actually just a few weeks ago, has been sued by Brazilian workers over slavery-like conditions on Brazilian coffee farms. And speaking about different drivers for sustainability, we actually just had a very insightful discussion at our office a few weeks ago with Michael Posner, who's a well-known business and human rights professor from NYU Stern. And yeah, I think he also made a very clear point. And in his view, some of the current main drivers for companies, he specifically talked about the US context, but I think this is also applicable to other contexts for sure. And yeah, we were discussing main drivers, and he said that the main drivers really are a strong leadership in the individual company, EU legislative developments, and risks to reputation. And I thought it was very relatable that when talking about reputational risks, he refers to the court of public opinion, which companies constantly see themselves exposed to. And the next point that you can also see here on the slide, the advantages of having a strong and thorough risk management system in place is also very important and can definitely be leveraged if you need buy-in within your company. Because having a strong risk management system helps companies to better understand and also address their risks with measures. And that is certainly making companies more resilient. Especially one example are the disruptions that many companies experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic when it comes to their supply chains. And I think here it's very important, to highlight that rather than reacting after something goes wrong, a strong management system, risk management system, can help you to be proactive and can help companies to really act early. And yeah, and with the expected postponements actually under the Omnibus packages that I mentioned earlier, companies now really have a chance and additional time to align the various requirements under the current laws, the upcoming laws, and really integrate them into one coherent risk management system.
If I can quickly jump in here with a follow-up, given all the regulatory uncertainty we are seeing right now, where do you think companies should actually start within their sustainability journey?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? With so many overlapping frameworks and shifting timelines, I think we can all say it's quite overwhelming. But even in this uncertainty, there are clear and practical actions that companies can take to, as Naz and Katharina have both said it nicely, cut through the noise and stay compliant, resilient, and also future ready. When we work with clients, we typically break it down into 3 key steps. Firstly, to assess and align. So you need to know where you stand and where you plan to go. You need to have good governance and oversight. That means to embed accountability, deliver on data, and also communicate your progress. And then you need to focus on capacity building to empower your people and extend your impact. So let's have a quick look at each of these, starting with the first one, to assess and align. So one of the first and most critical steps is understanding where your company stands and where it needs to go, like I mentioned. So assessing your current position against evolving sustainability regulations is essential, but it's not just about knowing your legal obligation, it's also about understanding the different frameworks that are relevant for your business, and even most importantly, how they intersect. Because in many cases, different regulations touch upon the same underlying requirements. To use an example, the ESRS and the CDP both cover overlapping environmental questions, and in some cases even use the same wording. We recently worked with a client on a gap assessment against the ESRS, and during the process, we received a completed CDP submission. But the submission didn't come from our contact. It came from a different team member within the same organization. Luckily, the data turned out to be incredibly useful for us for addressing these parts of the ESRS. But this being said, it was actually a good reminder that alignment across teams can unlock real efficiency and help avoid duplication. It also re-emphasized a common challenge that we're seeing quite regularly, is that different departments often work in silos, which leads to them being unaware of how their work actually connects, and how the insights across the different teams can be used efficiently. So that's where internal coordination becomes essential, and I'll touch upon that in a moment under governance. But once you've assessed where you are, the next critical step is to develop a clear roadmap. And this is something we always encourage our clients to do. While we don't suggest companies to wait for regulations to take action, which is what this whole webinar is also about, it's important to keep in mind that the frameworks themselves can offer valuable guidance, even if the implementation timelines are shifting. To refer to the CSRD again, it requires companies to prioritize topic, define time horizons, and also set measurable targets, which makes a roadmap not just helpful, but also necessary. But regardless of where the CSRD stands, having a forward-looking actionable plan is essential, just like you would actually have for any other strategic priority. A well-designed roadmap brings clarity, direction, and measurable progress, which is essential during uncertain times. And it's also what turns ambition into action. The second point we recommend focusing on is governance and oversight. And also we recognize that this is often easier said than done. But just recently, a client asked how they should manage all of the overlapping regulations without doing double work. And it's also a question that we're receiving more and more frequently. And in our experience, the answer actually lies in integration and collaboration. And as I've just mentioned, frameworks might cover different topics, but often rely on similar processes. So without coordination, it's actually quite easy to duplicate efforts or even sometimes miss something altogether. And that's why a strong governance framework is so important. It helps guide decision-making, ensure accountability, and critically, it actually connects the dots across different teams so sustainability doesn't become a siloed effort. Alongside this, you need the buy-in from senior leadership, but it's also important to clearly define other roles across different departments. To use another example with a client, we had worked with them to develop a governance model for their human rights due diligence management system. And the aim was to clearly map out who does what, basically. So we looked at the sourcing team, the ESG team, all the way through the legal team, the HR team, and up to the senior management. And we helped them define reporting lines to make sure accountability and transparency were built in at every level. And this gave them a map on how to go forward, making sure that everyone knew what to do and by when it should also be done. So the effective oversight isn't just about assigning tasks either. There's the other side of it, which looks at data and data collection. And there needs to be the right system in place to do so, and also to track what has been done and to organize the internal coordination. So if we say, for example, that the sustainability team is expected to report on progress, they need to make sure that it's visible what is happening across the business. So they need to have access to the reliable, consistent data in a timely manner. And importantly, good governance and oversight also strengthens communication, both internally and externally, which ensures that the right messages backed with the accurate data reach the right stakeholders at the right time. And here I'll pass it back to you, Nas, to expand on this.
Thanks so much. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that message. And building on that, I would also like to take us a step further into how communications and capacity building can actually strengthen that alignment. So in times of uncertainty, people across your organization or outside of it want to know, why does this still matter, right? So that's actually where the communications come in and act as a strategic tool. So it's not about only ticking boxes, it's more about connecting the dots and seeing the bigger picture and helping others to see that picture, how it actually stands within a bigger framework. So the companies that we observed to get this right managed to turn this confusion into clarity in their own messaging, and a little like the resistance also turns into understanding. So we've seen teams using their internal communications to explain how their responsible sourcing, purchasing, or recruitment practices actually make the business stronger. And this is not because the law says so, but because it actually aligns with their long-term direction and values. And there are some things actually that can work in practice. First things first, mapping the landscape is very important. So we really need to help our team to understand what's here to stay. And things like risk management, stakeholder engagement, transparency, these are here to stay. What's shifting? The scope of legal regulations, the obligations, these will shift, and it is important to offer your team members a roadmap with certain actions that would make sense no matter what, regardless of the regulations. Second, making it relatable. That's very important. The companies that usually succeed don't just throw jargon or talk about highly technical stuff to people. They indeed, like in fact, tell some stories. So they share quick data points, quotes from their colleagues, bring examples, short examples from the field. If they are a companies with global supply chains, they also bring stories from production countries they operate in to basically explain how sustainability practices are tied into everyday lives of people that they work with, that they engage with. And third, investing in peer learning. This is also a very important step. So capacity building shouldn't always come from the top, but indeed some of the most effective formats that I've seen are usually informal. So like brown bag sessions, or what would you do if kind of scenario discussion. So you can really ask your team members, what would you do if a journalist asked about your supplier's labor practices? So these would also allow you to think practically and ask some hard questions to yourself for a specific situation, and it would eventually help you to also grow confidence when dealing basically the real situations. Fourth, equipping your leaders and teams. So that's how it works in communications. You give talking points that they can use, right? So we can't really expect leaders or our team members to speak credibly about sustainability if we haven't helped them understand how to connect the technical part with the strategic side of things. So another example that I've seen is basically circulating internal toolkits for buyers and procurement teams to integrate rights-based approaches right into day-to-day operations. And last, I'd like to also underline the risks of greenwashing here. So be aware of the risks of greenwashing, right? So as opposed to greenwashing is the new trend when companies do under-communicate or just prefer to stay silent about their sustainability efforts. This might be out of fear or of backlash or scrutiny, which is totally understandable in this current context. However, it may, even though it does seem like a safer route to follow, it also prevents meaningful dialogue and growth, because by not sharing your progress or challenges that you've seen or lessons learned, we'd also miss out some opportunities to learn, improve, and inspire others. So it doesn't have to be always, pinky skies, progress, achievements. People would also need to hear sincere, real life examples, because it is very hard to operate a business today. So we should really aim to communicate openly and sharing both achievements and challenges we are learning along the way. So before I move into the Q&A, I'd also like to wrap up with some final calls to action based on what I've heard from our speakers that we can maybe all consider together. So it's crucial that we find some ways to stay on the course. So even when laws are delayed or debated, your direction doesn't have to be. Sustainability isn't a passing trend. It's a guiding principle that keeps our businesses relevant and resilient. So we'll have to stick to this. Don't just follow headlines, but connect the dots. So show how regulatory framework is actually part of a broader ecosystem and be proactive and focus on substance over slogans. So in the end, it's all about navigating uncertainty with intention and using our capacity basically to adapt as much as possible. So we'll now open the floor to your questions. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A if you haven't done so already. So I guess the first question is more about developing a workable sustainability strategy. We kind of covered that, so I'll move to the second one. What is the current timeline for the Omnibus procedure until we get some clarity? Katerina, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, just very quickly, I think, of course, this is a little bit like looking into a crystal ball. And the one thing that is certain, I would say, is that we will certainly be very busy with that, with the Omnibus, with the different Omnibus packages throughout the entire year. I think when we look at the content changes of the Omnibus Package 1, for example, regarding this year's DDD, I think here the negotiations and the trialogue will certainly last until the end of the year, maybe even until the beginning of next year. There's one distinction. I mean, we have seen some fast-track procedures already regarding the postponement of the CSRD and CSDDD, also even before the Omnibus of the EUBR. That has been done fairly quickly. When we are looking at the news from yesterday at the EUBR timeline, there's nothing certain yet. But similarly to the EUBR, EUDR and the CSDDD, CSRD, maybe the postponed EU battery regulation timeline for the due diligence obligation might also get fast-tracked. That's definitely an option, but necessary to very much keep track of that. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I would like to merge the third and the fourth question. So what would you suggest for leadership in decision when there is a resistance to investing in HREDD until things are settled, and what really works best in terms of getting other departments involved and invested? Maxine, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so when I read these questions, I actually had to think about this LinkedIn post that I saw yesterday. And there was one statement that stuck with me, which was sustainability isn't political, it's structural, and unsustainable business is no longer sustainable. I think we've covered quite a few reasons as to why leadership should really want to future-proof the business, especially if they want to continue and stay ahead of the game. Some of them being, HREDD supports cost reduction through efficiency and smarter risk management. It also enables competitive advantages, and it strengthens reputation and reduces risk. From the leadership perspective, it's also about being strategic with resources, actually, as it helps you now have this time to prepare for becoming compliant with regulations that won't completely disappear either. So you may as well use the time now instead of being stuck with the last minute and hecticness of it in a couple of years. And also in doing so, it's important to involve all of your teams across different departments and really focus on the element of capacity building, because if that is missing, there will also be a blocking point that different team members won't know how exactly their work fits into the whole agenda of sustainability. So it needs to be clear. And that's what I would encourage here.
Thanks so much. Our time is almost up, but there is also the one last question that I'd like to take. Recent political debates made it harder to talk about ESG, DEI, or human rights in our organization, and how can we communicate value-based work internally and externally? So a very quick answer to this, when the political climate makes it very tough to talk about these issues, some companies are actually finding smarter ways to still keep those values alive, right? So we've seen some companies basically shifting how they talk about DEI. So some organizations are actually calling it belonging at work and letting employee resource groups to have small open conversations within their team members. So I guess the most important thing here is to focus on the action first and the communication second. So if we are going to use that kind of language, we really have to back it up with real action. So people would notice if there is a gap between your words and your actions. So the focus really needs to be on what we do, not just what we say. And if you're trained, like if your hiring team, for instance, in your organization is already trained to spot unconscious bias, or if your job advertisements are reviewed for inclusive language, or if you're offering training to support your team members to build capacity on these issues, you're already showing that belonging isn't just a word for you, right? So it's a part of your business, and your communications should be able to reflect that. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We hope this session gave you some ideas and maybe a bit of encouragement for navigating what's next. Before we close, we'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to fill out our short post-webinar survey. It will help us to improve and tailor future sessions to what really matters to you. And the survey will pop up when the webinar ends. And for the questions which remain unanswered, we'll also reach out to you individually. We look forward to seeing you at one of our next sessions. Take care and have a great day.